2 million votes vanished. In Venezuela's July 2025 election, that's not just a headline. It's the core mystery, really shaking the nation. It sounds like something from a political thriller, almost, but it's a very real, very pressing question for a country already, well, on the brink. Our mission today is to try and unravel what happened to these missing votes. We'll explore why this discrepancy is such a critical moment for Venezuela's democracy and, what it might signal for democratic processes elsewhere. Understanding these numbers is absolutely key, I think, to grasping where things might go next for Venezuela.
It really is a critical moment. You have to remember, Venezuela has been caught in this relentless cycle of political turmoil for decades now. We're talking economic freefall, empty shelves, hyperinflation that's just staggering, and of course, layered on top, international sanctions. So this election, July 2025, it wasn't just another vote. It felt like a genuine fork in the road, a real make-or-break moment for the idea of democracy there. It's under immense pressure.
The stakes just couldn't be higher. Okay, let's get straight to the numbers at the heart of this mystery then. Venezuela has, roughly 20 million registered voters?
That's about right, yeah, around 20 million.
And based on previous elections, where politics is so intense because it impacts daily life so directly, turnout was expected to be higher, right? Around 14 million.
That was the general projection, yes. Around 14 million seemed plausible given past engagement levels.
But the official turnout announced by the government, only 12 million.
Exactly, 12 million.
And here's where it gets really stark. That's a difference of 2 million votes. That's not a small error margin. It's huge.
Yeah.
So how do we even begin to account for that? Where did those potential voters or votes go?
Well, the official explanation came from the government's electoral body, the CNE, that's the National Electoral Council. They reported turnout at 60% of eligible voters, and they insisted the process was, clean, transparent, digitally secure.
Okay, so what were their specific reasons for the lower number?
They offered a few explanations. They suggested many Venezuelans living abroad didn't manage to vote, that some opposition groups might have encouraged boycotts, and they even cited a sort of general fear or maybe apathy among the population as contributing factors.
Right, but that official line, well, it didn't land well with the opposition, did it?
No, not at all. Maria Corina Machado and her coalition, they immediately raised alarm bells. They were deeply skeptical.
It wasn't just skepticism, though, was it? They had a counter-narrative.
Absolutely. They claimed the government deliberately engineered those lower turnout numbers.
Engineered them how? In what end?
To basically make Maduro's victory margin look bigger, more decisive than perhaps it really was, inflate his percentage.
I see. And did they back this up? Did they point to specific issues?
Oh, yes. They didn't just make vague claims. They pointed to very specific irregularities that observers saw on Election Day. We heard reports, for example, of polling stations opening late, sometimes hours late.
Which obviously cuts down the time people have to actually vote.
Exactly. And then there were documented cases of voters just being turned away. No clear explanation given, even if they had the right ID.
That sounds problematic.
And perhaps most concerning, there were widespread reports of intimidation tactics. These seemed particularly common in rural areas where, independent oversight is often harder to maintain.
And what about independent groups? Fact-checkers, election monitors?
Crucially, yes. Independent fact-checkers and watchdog groups, these nonpartisan organizations that really dig into the data, they found what they called suspicious gaps in the official turnout figures.
Gaps where?
Especially noticeable in major urban centers, places like Caracas, Maracaibo, Valencia areas known to have strong opposition support. The numbers just didn't seem to align with observations.
And we have concrete examples of this, right? Like in Caracas.
Yes, Caracas is a prime example. In districts known to lean heavily towards the opposition, observers on the ground estimated turnout was high, maybe 70%. You had photos of long lines, people waiting all day. But then the CNE, the official body, their reported figure for those same districts was only 50%.
Wow. That's a 20% gap. That's hundreds of thousands of votes just in those areas.
Exactly. You can feel the frustration, that disconnect between what people saw and experienced and what was officially reported. And similar stories came out of Maracaibo and Valencia, too.
So the opposition paints this picture of, significant irregularities happening right there on the ground. But how could that happen, especially with an electronic voting system? Isn't that supposed to be secure?
Well, Venezuela's system has been electronic for years now. It's a kind of hybrid design.
Hybrid how?
Voters use a touchscreen, cast their ballot electronically, but then the machine prints a physical paper receipt.
A paper trail.
Right. The voter verifies that receipt, then deposits it into a traditional ballot box. So in theory, that paper trail should act as a check, make it auditable, robust, transparent.
In theory.
Ah.
That often flags a problem, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What do the critics say?
Critics argue the system isn't foolproof. It could potentially be manipulated before the results are finalized and transmitted.
How so?
Concerns include the fact that the central servers are often managed by companies with, let's say, strong links to the government.
Okay.
And independent audits, the kind you'd need to really verify the electronic count against the paper receipts, they're notoriously difficult to conduct, often restricted.
And isn't there some history here with the company that provided the machines?
Yes, that's crucial context. Back in 2017, Smartmatic, the company that actually supplied Venezuela's voting machines for years, publicly accused the government of tampering with results in a previous vote. They claimed the turnout numbers had been inflated.
Wow, the provider itself called foul.
Exactly. That memory definitely lingers. It hangs over subsequent elections, raising that persistent question. Could something similar, some kind of manipulation, have happened again in 2025?
That history is really unsettling. And it ties into the oversight issue too, right? Who was actually watching this election?
That's another major point of contention. The government heavily restricted international observers for this election.
Restricted how?
They primarily allowed observers from, let's call them friendly countries, places like Russia, China, Cuba. Major independent bodies, groups like the European Union or the OAS, the Organization of American States, they were largely absent.
Why were they absent?
They cited a lack of guarantees from the government for truly impartial, unrestricted monitoring. They didn't feel they could do their jobs effectively.
So fewer independent eyes on the process overall.
Significantly fewer, yes. However, it's important to note that local NGOs and Venezuelan watchdog groups were active. They did manage to operate, gather data, and document many of those inconsistencies we've been talking about.
And it all circles back to those missing 2 million votes.
It does. That discrepancy is the central thread.
Okay, we've laid out the stark reality of this gap and the totally conflicting stories trying to explain it. To really get our heads around this, let's break down the main theories people are using to make sense of these missing votes. What are the leading explanations?
Right. Broadly, there seem to be three main theories circulating. The first focuses on suppression. The idea here is that a significant number of voters were actively prevented from voting.
How? Through delays, intimidation.
Exactly. Blocked, delayed, intimidated, turned away, basically. Systematic hurdles put in place to artificially push the turnout number down. It suggests it wasn't voter choice, but external factors stopping them.
Okay, that's theory one. Suppression. What's number two?
The second theory is fraud. This suggests the votes were actually cast, but they weren't counted correctly, or perhaps the official numbers were adjusted, manipulated somewhere in the process before being released to the public. Basically, tampering with the tally itself.
Got it. Suppression, fraud.
Yeah.
And the third?
The third theory is apathy. This one posits that, look, after years and years of deep crisis, economic hardship, political gridlock, millions of Venezuelans just might have given up.
So they simply didn't show up. Lost faith in the whole process.
That's the idea. They might feel elections don't change anything, so why bother participating? Disillusionment, essentially.
That definitely sounds plausible too, given the long crisis. But for those who lean towards apathy, how do they account for that sudden, really sharp drop compared to expectations? Especially when, as you said, political engagement has often been high despite the difficulties.
That's the challenge for the pure apathy argument. While you can never discount disillusionment, many analysts and observers find it less compelling as the sole explanation here. Given the scale of the discrepancy, the specific geographic patterns, those gaps in opposition areas, and the documented reports from the ground.
It seems more likely to be a mix.
Many believe it's most likely a combination, primarily of the first two theories. Some level of voter suppression combined with some form of electoral fraud seems, to many, a more fitting explanation for a 2 million vote gap than just a sudden, massive wave of apathy.
Okay, so if we accept that suppression and/or fraud likely played a significant role, how does this whole turnout question impact Maduro's standing, his legitimacy?
It's fascinating, actually, because it cuts both ways. Domestically, sometimes a lower turnout can paradoxically be spun to help the incumbent.
How so?
Well, the government can try to portray the opposition as weak, unable to mobilize supporters, and mathematically, if the total number of votes is lower, Maduro's share of those votes looks like a higher percentage. It can make his win seem more dominant, at least on paper.
Ah, I see. A smaller pie makes his slice look bigger.
Exactly. But internationally, it tends to backfire badly.
Why the difference?
Because internationally, those unexplained discrepancies scream unreliable. If the basic turnout numbers don't add up, if they contradict observer reports, it immediately raises a huge question. How can anyone trust the final result?
So it becomes a credibility issue on the world stage.
Precisely. And you saw this play out. Countries like the US, Canada, much of Europe, they voiced serious doubts, effectively challenging the legitimacy of the outcome. Meanwhile, allies, Russia, China, Cuba, they quickly congratulated Maduro, signaling their acceptance. It almost forces countries to pick a side based on the numbers controversy.
It becomes a geopolitical marker almost.
In a way, yes. The vote count itself becomes a tool in international relations, used to validate or condemn based often on pre-existing alignments, rather than purely on the objective integrity of the vote.
Now, I absolutely have to talk about the diaspora, the Venezuelans abroad factor. That's a huge piece of this puzzle, isn't it?
Massive. You're talking about over 7 million Venezuelans living outside the country now. A huge number.
Many of whom presumably want to vote, to have a say in their country's future.
Desperately. But their ability to actually do so was severely restricted in this election. We heard endless reports of understaffed consulates, incredibly complicated paperwork requirements, long delays.
And even just being denied ballots.
Yes, even outright denials in some cases. The opposition argues, quite convincingly, I think, that this effectively disenfranchised millions of potential voters living abroad.
And that alone could account for a big chunk of those missing 2 million.
It certainly could explain a significant part of the discrepancy between expected and reported turnout. It's a huge demographic, largely excluded from participating.
So how did people inside Venezuela react to all this? The results, the controversy.
Well, there was an immediate reaction. Protests did erupt in major cities almost as soon as the results were announced. People were demanding answers, wanting their voices heard. But fear is a very real factor in Venezuela. The authorities cracked down quickly on those rallies. There were arrests, particularly targeting opposition figures and activists.
So the protest fizzled.
To some extent, yes. Many ordinary Venezuelans, perhaps fearing reprisals or feeling resigned after so many years of struggle, chose silence or, well, quiet frustration over continued public defiance.
It's understandable. Imagine, as you said, waiting hours to vote, seeing long lines, feeling that civic participation, and then seeing official numbers that suggest maybe half the people in your area just didn't bother showing up. That disconnect must be incredibly demoralizing.
Profoundly so. And that's why this mystery of the 2 million votes really resonated. It became this potent symbol of all that frustration, whether people felt those votes were actively stolen, systematically suppressed, or just got lost somewhere in a broken bureaucratic system. It represents a voice unheard.
So wrapping this up, the core mystery persists. We may never get a single, definitive, universally accepted answer to what exactly happened to those 2 million potential votes in Venezuela's July 2025 election. The layers of conflicting narratives. The official story versus the opposition's claims, compounded by that lack of comprehensive, independent oversight. It makes certainty incredibly difficult.
That's true. But here's what we can say with confidence. The official turnout numbers reported by the CNE simply do not align with numerous observations made on the ground, particularly in key urban areas. Both opposition voices inside Venezuela and many international critics outside the country largely interpret this discrepancy as evidence of manipulation, whether through suppression, fraud, or a combination. And for ordinary Venezuelans, it just deepens that already pervasive feeling that democracy, in a meaningful sense, is broken, that their fundamental right to choose their leaders has been undermined and their collective voice somehow distorted or silenced.
And, this whole situation, it really raises a crucial question, not just for Venezuela, but for all of us watching around the world. When election numbers themselves become so openly contested, when millions of votes seem to vanish without a clear, verifiable explanation, what does that do to the fundamental trust between a government and its people? And maybe even more broadly, how do we as a global community work to maintain the integrity of democratic processes when these kinds of large, unresolved discrepancies occur? It's certainly something to keep mulling over.